The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to this webinar about Airlock Gateway 7.8 and Airlock Microgateway 3.1. My name is Burkhart, and here with me is Michael Doujak. This webinar is recorded, so in case you have colleagues that you want to share this with, we will send you the link to the video after the webinar. If you have questions during the webinar, there is this Q&A tab on the control panel, so feel free to add questions there. We will answer them during the webinar, or we will have a look in the end if there are still open questions. Great, so let's start with an overview on the agenda. The first part will be on Airlock Gateway 7.8. Topics will be the Airlock Anomaly shield, and this will be a bit more than just covering additional features in 7.8, so it will actually be an introduction to the functionality. So in case you haven't heard of it, that's for you. That's very much you can lean back and enjoy and learn all about Anomaly shield. And then there's two new features in Gateway 7.8, the dynamic backend selection. And also we improved usability for defining allow and deny lists for headers. And then there will be announcements about the next coming release. Airlock Gateway 8.0 will be a major release, so we want to make you aware of certain things that will come up. And in the end, we'll have an overview on Airlock Microgateway 3.1. It has already been released, but it was never covered in a webinar so far. So we're gonna catch up with this. Okay, so Mike, the stage is yours.
Well, Martin, thank you very much for the introduction, and welcome everyone to this webinar. I will be talking to you about the Anomaly Shield, the version 3 as we call it, because it really has quite a few additional features. And to start off, I would like to quickly look back at the internet as it is today and see what kind of traffic we're seeing there. You'll see later on why this is important, but if we believe researchers, then they basically tell us that regular websites see about 63% human traffic, about 13% good bots. Good bots would be Google search engine or Bing search engine, or also job search engines that travel to your websites looking for job announcements so that they can populate their own websites, things like that. So about 3/4 of the traffic is regular traffic that you really want on your website. But then there is 20 to 25% of bots that you don't really want on your websites. And the reason is, or the background is, or what these bots are doing is they're automated threats. And one is of particular interest to us, and that's vulnerability scanning. And the reason for vulnerability scanning being of particular interest is because hackers love it. What do hackers do when they try to find a new victim? Well, they scan the internet, they look for servers that actually have some vulnerability that they can exploit. And they do that automatically. And those automated tools, they're really a problem. And as the defender, what you want to do is a very strong forechecking. We know it from ice hockey, but trust me, in cybersecurity works exactly the same way. If you block very early and you send those vulnerability scanners away, and then as a target for an attacker, for a hacker, you're just less interesting because you're much more difficult to crack. And they probably go someplace else. And that's exactly the behavior we want those hackers to show. Go someplace else and do not try to hack anything that's protected by Airlock Gateway. So how do we defend? Well, the Anomaly Shield really adds a new perspective. Traditionally, what we did is we analyzed request by request, and we checked for malicious content, or we said, well, is it a known attacker? So we had our deny rules with regular pattern expressions in them that were checking for malicious content. They had IP blacklists, and we basically defended against known attacks. With the Anomaly Shield, the target is a little bit different because we really want to protect against unknown attacks and specifically against automated attacks. So what we did is we left the request analysis area and we went to session analysis. So we combined multiple requests within the session and we used that to define behavior. So multiple requests gives you behavior, and if you have behavior, then you can kind of define what is regular behavior. That would be the good bots and the human traffic that you have on your website. And knowing normal behavior, you of course can say, hey, this is abnormal behavior, anomalous behavior, and that's what you don't want. And we're using machine learning mechanisms to actually achieve that. If we put those two things together, then we find that they complement each other. So the deny rules and IP blacklists and all these things are not going away. The request-oriented defense is still valid and it still works. And as I said, it's not going to away. Machine learning is going to complement it. It's an additional feature. It's additional layer of protection through behavior analysis. Now, if we're looking into the machine learning thing, then we want to figure out on how this machine learning works. And there's really three types of patterns that how you can train a machine. The first one is supervised learning. So you're kind of telling the machine if something is good or bad. For example, if you're having an email filter in your email client and you tell it this is spam, then hopefully that filter uses machine learning technologies to train itself, and over time it will learn better and better what spam is and will show you much less spam and directly move it to your spam folder. Then we have reinforcement learning. There the machine basically gets to play a game, use some strategies, and at the end of the run you tell the machine on whether it was a successful result or not successful, and the machine will try with machine learning to improve its own behavior so it gets more successful results and develop strategies to that end and less unsuccessful ones. And the third one is unsupervised learning. With unsupervised learning, we're kind of using huge amounts of data and we're looking for similarities. Amazon uses this since a couple of years already. When you look at a movie, they basically tell you, well, there is other movies you also might be interested in because other users were interested in those movies, hoping that you'll buy more movies from their website, of course. But it's the unsupervised learning that we're really interested in because that's the mechanism that we're basing the Anomaly Shield on, looking for similarities, basically looking for human behavior, and then we're saying everything that's not human behavior, we can segregate that from the regular behavior that we want on our website. Having said all that, do you now need to get a PhD in data science, study a couple of years at the ETH? No, of course not. You can save yourself the time. I mean, if you're interested, go for it, but it's not necessary to use the Anomaly Shield. Actually, quite different. Deploying and setting up the Anomaly Shield is fairly simple. What does it require? Well, you first have to check the prerequisites. Without session handling on a mapping, it's not going to work with the Anomaly Shield. As I said, multiple requests in a session, that gives behavior. A single request just won't do. You have to turn it on, which is a single button in the user interface. And you may want to exclude some pen test and vulnerability scans. For example, if your security officer runs them on a daily or weekly basis, you don't want those pen tests to pollute your data. You don't want to train the Anomaly Shield with pen tests and vulnerability scan, or at least as little as possible. Then you wait. Waiting, well, actually you don't wait, you do something else, but for the Anomaly Shield, it's a waiting period. It collects data, and we're basically recommending that you allow it to collect data for 1 week. Now, why 1 week? Well, you want traffic from Monday mornings, you want them from Friday afternoons, from during daytime, in the evening, early morning, during the night, during the weekend. So you have all different kind of users that use your website in this training data. And the other thing is you want at least 10,000 sessions. Now, I know there's certain customers that have 10,000 sessions probably in a quarter an hour, but not all customers are that way. Some have fewer sessions, and if you collect the data for 1 week, most of you should be able to get those 10,000 sessions. 10,000 sessions is a ballpark figure. If it's a little less, it's still okay. If it's a lot more, then of course that's also fine. 10,000 sessions is just the number we came up with to make sure that machine learning really trains behavior and not exceptions. And last but not least, that's also very important, you have to use normal traffic from the production environment. You cannot use a test setup with artificial test runs or Selenium tests, things like that. It doesn't work. We tried that a couple of years ago, and what happened is that our anomaly shield at that time basically started blocking traffic from Wednesday afternoon 4 o'clock to 4:15 because our attack in the artificial traffic happened during that time, so it just blocked it. I mean, the result from a machine learning perspective was absolutely perfect, but for our purposes it was useless, and we had to learn the hard way that you have to use production traffic if you want to train an anomaly shield for production use. Then there is another 10 minutes of work. You have to configure the sensors with triggers and rules. I'm going to show that in a minute. You run the training, you apply to generate a model, and you're ready for operation. Simple as that. During operation, while the protection is active, we do exactly what you've configured it to do. You can use your usual monitoring systems. It will create log entries, just like the gateway does. You can use a Kibana and Elasticsearch if they use them in your environment. And very important, you can adjust the sensitivity. So if you feel that it's a little bit too sensitive, you can increase those figures. If you think that it's too lenient and not catching enough attacks, then you can also adjust it in the other direction. In typical environments, relearning is not required. It may be required if you really change in your app, like you're going from REST interface version 2 to a version 3, and the version 3 is totally different. You have to rewrite all your client applications anyway. Then you also have to retrain the anomaly shield. If it's just minor changes, a few tweaks here and there in a REST interface, then you won't notice the behavior doesn't really change. Now, this all sounds great, and the question is, how did we actually manage to get there? And the anomaly shield took a few evolutionary steps. It started out in 7.6, where we had to configure everything with expert settings. So really one big text file, and in the text file were all the rules and everything for the anomaly shield. It was quite complicated, and we were lucky to have 3 customers and partners that worked with us to really deploy that in live production environments, and they were willing to, or with our support, they were able to get this thing up and running. And since 7.6, we have production installations that use the anomaly shield. In 7.7, we introduced the configuration into the GUI because we really knew that expert settings alone would not work with this feature. So we wanted to make it easier, and 7.7 was a lot of focus on improving the user experience for you as administrators, and we put everything in the GUI. With the 7.8 version that we're talking about today, we put the focus on the machine learning sensors, kind of the algorithms that we're using and the way we're using the data from the request to calculate on whether something is anomalous or not. And we had 2 people full-time just working on that. And I can proudly say that the improvements they have made on the detection on the sensors is absolutely incredible. So let me quickly switch over to another screen, because now I'm going to actually show you what the anomaly shield looks like in a production system. So this is a hopefully still working. Let me see. Yeah. Yes, I'm still logged in. I am logging. So what we're looking here is a virtual machine that is just for testing purposes. And we're seeing here the reverse proxy of this machine. Let me quickly go out here so you can actually see what kind of mapping I'm looking at. So we have one virtual host, we have a backend host, and we have a mapping here in the middle. On the mapping, there is one configuration that you must do if you want to use the anomaly shield. So I'm opening this mapping here, and on the basic tab right at the bottom, you'll find a new configuration for the anomaly shield. And in here, the only thing you do is you assign the mapping to an anomaly shield application. So an anomaly shield application bundles multiple mappings and then does the behavior analysis over those bundled mappings on that application. That's very simple. If we're now going into the configuration of the anomaly shield, I'll start with triggers and rules. What are triggers and rules? Well, triggers are the place where you actually detect an anomaly, and rules is where you react on whatever the trigger has found. Let me show you such a trigger and how difficult it is to configure it. Well, it requires a name. The name here says min bit count 4. Min bit count 4 basically stems from this line here, where we actually set the minimal bit count. Now, what does this mean? To interpret that line, very simple, at least 4 of the 6 sensors that are in the anomaly shield have decided that this session is considered anomalous. And if you want to know what those sensors are, first you see them down here in the patterns. You could actually create your own exceptions to this minimal bit count. This is an AND combined rule, or you can find them in the documentation. For those of you that are not extremely familiar with our documentation, we have here in the Gateway documentation, chapter 7, conceptual information. And in conceptual information, there is the Airlock Anomaly Shield, and it gives a lot of background information on how the Anomaly Shield internally works. And one of the things we have in here is how request data is processed into Anomaly indicator patterns. Those are the sensors. I always call them sensors because I think that sensors is much more easily understood. So here on the left-hand side, you see what we're taking from the request, like the client IP, request timestamps, and then there is an aggregation over from the different requests into a session aggregate, and this session aggregate is then handed over to the machine learning algorithms. Now, this is where the magic happens, and you see there's lots of errors and lots of strange things. If you really want to understand that, I suggest that you actually get that PhD in data science because I don't understand it. But as a result of all that calculation, every one of these sensors has now a value. Like, for example, 0.1 is between 0 and 1, or 0.993. And that value is now compared to the threshold that you can configure. Of course, we provide you with pre-configured values, but it's compared to the threshold. And at the end, if you compare it to the threshold, it's either above, meaning it's anomalous, or it's below, meaning it's normal. And that's what happens here. So this is what the trigger does. Let's leave the trigger and now go into the rule. So I have 2 rules. The first one says terminate session with bit count 4. So 4 sensors say it's anomalous. I terminate the session, and log incident with bit count 3 is the second rule that I've created. And that one just logs it if the bit count's 3. How difficult is it to configure? Well, you have to have a name. You have to tell it which trigger you're using. Well, in the terminate session with bit count 4, I'm of course using the trigger min bit count 4. And here I'm saying what the actions are. I want it logged. I want the session tagged as anomalous, and I want it terminated. That's all you need to know about triggers and rules. Now let's look into the Anomaly Shield application. Well, the first thing you can do is up here, you can turn it on. If this is on the off switch, then the Anomaly Shield is not working at all. And that we don't want, since I want to demonstrate a few more things here. And then we can go into one of the applications. Here it just displays you the status that training data collection and anomaly detection is turned on. So let's look at the details. You have the name up here, then this is the mapping. You remember at the very beginning, I told you that the mapping can be assigned to an Anomaly Shield application. That's this, training data collection. You turn it on, and that's it. This exclusion table here is only required if you have a security officer that runs internal pen testing, vulnerability scans, things like that, and you want to exclude them. So very simple again. And anomaly detection and response, well, you have to turn it on so that something actually works. And then you can decide on whether you're going to be prudent or a little bit more proactive. You can either have the actions executed or just logged. So in the beginning, you might want to put on log only so you can see what it actually would do. And once you feel comfortable with the results, you can start executing actions. I'm wanted verbose, so I'm logging sessions for every request, and then I'm adding response rules. So here you can find the rules that we've defined before, the terminate session and the log incident with bit counts 4 and 3 respectively. And you can also put in an exception. So you can, for example, say this IP address, even if it has a bit count of 4, it still not be blocked anything because there is an exception. It will log the exception in the log file. Now on my test systems, I don't have those exceptions, so I'm not going to log anything. That's it for the configuration. Now let's take a look at the logging. So I'm switching over to the log viewer. And in the background, I did run a few sessions so that we actually see some messages here. So the first one I would like to introduce to you is the WRSG Anomaly 200. The Anomaly 200 message is very important because it gives you the assessment of the anomaly shield on the session. So what do you find in here? The first thing you find are the ML values. Remember when I said that you calculate those using those machine learning models? Well, those are the calculated values. For example, here, TCS at 0967, that's a calculated value. Then the thresholds, that's the thing you can tweak if it's too aggressive or not aggressive enough. And you see that the time constraint or the timing cluster has a threshold of 0.97. So 0.967 is a little bit below the threshold, and therefore the result here, and that's the last thing in the pattern, is that it's a 0. So it still considers this sensor to be normal. If it would be a little bit higher, and we just have to go 2 lines up, and we're looking at this line here, and there you see that the TCS is now moved to 1 because the result it returned is 0.993. And 0.993, of course, is greater than 0.97, which we find in the thresholds. So it's called an anomaly. So here we see how from bit count 3, it switched over to bit count 4. That's in the log. Now, we also find that in the dashboards, the anomaly shield is fully integrated with the dashboards that you've already seen. In your product, it's just a new attack type called behavior anomaly. So it's reported in attack types by type. It's reported in the attack heat map. It's reported in attacks by block type. And there's actually an additional statistic which tells you on whether there were normal status requests or there were anomalous requests. To see the anomalous request, I have to turn this off. So now you'll see only the red curve, and there were some anomalous requests detected. So it's fully integrated with your existing reporting. There's no need to do anything additional. That's it for the short demonstration. Now let's look a little bit back on the presentation on what we've learned or how well Anomaly Shield actually performs. And one of the most important learnings was that we detect 99% anomalies within the first 10 requests. And that's pretty good. If you think of it, already 10 requests are sufficient to detect behavior and to detect anomalous behavior. And that for 99% of all the anomalies that are detected overall. So that's pretty great for accuracy of the Anomaly Shield. I've also mentioned it a little bit on during the presentation of the user interface. You can react to those anomalies in quite distinctive ways. You can just decide to log it, you can decide to block sessions, or you can even block IP addresses unlimited or for a limited amount of time. So that's very, very successful. One more test that we did is we allowed the Anomaly Shield to detect anomalous behavior, and then we investigated those sessions that we found. And the Anomaly Shield, without knowing any signatures, without using any regexes, without having any prior knowledge, found very many different vulnerability scanners, and this was on the traffic of ergon.ch. And trust me, ergon.ch is not the website that is most exposed and that attackers find extremely interesting. But still, we saw all these attacks over a little bit of time, and the Anomaly Shield detected all of them without any additional information or additional help. So this really works. To summarize, The anomaly shield is very effective in detecting behavioral anomalies. It adapts to your business application. I've shown you how you can combine different mappings into an application, and then you train on that collected data for that particular application. So it really molds itself to your application, and it understands what normal behavior on the application is and finds out the anomalies. And if you need to, you can adjust the sensitivity, make it stronger, make it weaker, however you need. One of the plus points of the Anomaly Shield is there's 100% data protection. No data that we collect, that we calculate leaves your data center if you're still in your own data center, or your private cloud if you are in the cloud. Because all of the calculation, everything's done on Airlock Gateway, and there is no need for an ET phone home mechanism in there. It's very low maintenance. You see how complicated it was to set it up. You've seen how well it's integrated with the normal logging and reporting. So there's really not a lot you need to do. And since we're already since a year working on this Anomaly Shield with customers in production, we can say that it's highly stable and there's no noticeable impact on performance. And very good thing about the Anomaly Shield is that it really complements our existing mechanisms for defense against bots. And we now feature a very complete bot protection that combines all of what you see on this slide. Good, so that's it from the Anomaly Shield. Martin, question, did we have any questions already from the listeners out there?
Thank you, Mike. No, I don't see any questions. So if you have questions, as I said, you can use the tab in the control panel. So then I think we'll just go on in the presentation. I try to take over the screen. So
it's working. Thank you.
Worked. Okay, so dynamic backend selection, that's a new feature with the new Airlock Gateway release. And what's it all about? Consider a company that wants to deploy an application in servers that are dedicated to different countries, or it could just be different data centers. Then you would probably have landing pages corresponding to these different servers, for instance, a Swiss URL, CH, a German URL, DE, and so on. So how would you go about configuring Airlock Gateway for such a setup? So today, that means like before 7.8, you would have to do something like this. You would have a virtual host for each landing page, and then a mapping connecting each virtual host to the corresponding backend group. So now that's quite a simple setup. It's just having one mapping. In between, you could easily end up having 10 mappings because it might be a complex application. So what you're seeing here is that you have many identical mappings, and it's not because you need them. It's just because you need them to connect the virtual hosts to their backends. And so that will just blow up your your configuration screen, and you will have to use labels to shrink it down again and find what you're actually looking for. Now in 7.8 you get a new option. You can connect multiple backend groups to a mapping. So you could actually use a single mapping to connect all of these virtual hosts to their backend groups. Well, now, of course, the question is, how do we select the right backend group? And this is done using the host header. So on the backend group, you get a new field. It's called conditions. And there you can actually configure a pattern for the client host header that has been used by the client to connect to the virtual host. So if the client connected to company.com, then when selecting the backend, so going through one mapping for one for all, and so when selecting the backend group, we are revisiting this client host header and then selecting the corresponding backend group. And you see here another field, the priority. So You may know the regular expression mappings. If you're using regular expressions, it's not trivial to validate that these are exclusionary. So you might have overlapping patterns here, and that is just to make sure that we will always know which one to select in case you have overlapping patterns. But usually that shouldn't be necessary to use. So that's really nice feature to reduce the number of elements in your configuration. But just a word of warning. What we're doing here is actually evaluating a header that's sent by the client to route traffic in the backend. So if things go wrong and you actually do have internal hosts in the backend groups, then an attacker might actually connect to a certain virtual host but change the host header that the browser is sending. So in order to prevent this, when you're directing to an internal host, you can turn on the strictly match FQDN feature on the virtual host. That way, an illegal host header will not be accepted. Illegal means a host header that's not matching the virtual host that the connection is on. Okay, the next feature is a more explicit way of defining header, allow, and deny lists. So those of you that have configured these header whitelists or blacklists, they probably know that the usability is not that good. So I made an example here. You see on the top, you see the default actions that we provide. That's for the request header tab on the mapping. And on the bottom, you see custom actions that you can create yourself. Now, if you want to customize our action for header whitelists, what you have to do is to click on this button here on the top right. And this will copy actually the action to the panel below, where you can edit all the attributes. And if you want to use WebDev from Microsoft, you might need to include this ms.ext header. So what you're doing is you're modifying the pattern there. And now two things happen that you probably didn't want to happen. The pattern, the default pattern that we provide with the gateway is now disconnected from your custom action because you're providing the entire pattern by yourself. If we update the default pattern, you will not profit from this. And secondly, like the order of actions here, that's also the order in which they will be executed on the gateway. So what you see in the middle is that there are two more header actions adding X forwarded for and X forwarded proto headers. So what happens when you have a customized header whitelist is that it will actually remove these headers again because they were not automatically considered in the whitelist. So you would actually have to manage the whitelist whenever you add a header on your own using these actions. Then you will also have to update your custom header whitelist. So that's really annoying. And with 7.8, we made this feature more explicit. So it's no longer treated as a generic request action, but above the actions, you actually have two groups, one for allow list and one for deny list. So we also changed the name from whitelist to allow list and from blacklist to deny list. So that's kind of congruent with allow rules and deny rules that you already know. So what's the difference now? The default pattern that we provide will remain untouched. You can just select to use it using this checkbox. And then if you want to extend this pattern for a specific header, you have a separate field for doing this. So this WebDev header is now added to the additional allowed headers text field. And that way, the connection to our default pattern will be okay. So when we update the default pattern, you will profit from this, but your additional header will still be considered. And the second problem was that if you're adding X-forwarded 4 headers later on, you would also have to update your whitelist pattern. Since this is now a separate feature that's not within or it's not coming after the default actions and the custom actions, your headers will just stay there and they will not be removed by any custom action. So I hope this is a great improvement for reusability. As always, we have improved the deny rules. As you may know, we're having this bug bounty program on HackerOne. It's, I think, the third year now that we're doing this, and there are more than 90 improvements to our rules that were actually triggered by findings in this program. And when I say improvements, I don't just mean that they're getting stricter or block more evasions or something. We're also fixing false positives, so they're just getting more precise. Okay, now we have some announcements. Looking forward to Airlock Gateway 8, and it's going to be a major release. It's scheduled to be there in the fourth quarter this year, and it will be a full installation because we're migrating away from CentOS. The reason is that CentOS is end of life. Actually, it's not supported anymore, and we need to change the Linux distribution. It's not 100% clear what it will be, but yeah, it will just make updating the OS impossible. So that means you will have to do a new installation. You can import the configuration, of course, but it's not a drop-in update. Then there are some deprecated features. As you may know or may not know, there is the option to deploy Docker containers on Airlock Gateway, Docker hosts. That has been used by few customers to actually deploy Airlock IAM on a gateway. But we had lots of problems because Docker is actually very intrusive on a system. It will change your network settings and so on. So we decided to drop support for this. And then a thing that it's really been around for years, it's the legacy deny rules. I had to go and look when we actually introduced this term. It was in 2014. I think it was one of the first things that I did actually when I started as a product manager to create these new security levels that you know, the basic, standard, and strict. And when we introduced this in 5.1, I think it was, we labeled the old rules as legacy deny rules. And you have also seen lots of warnings in the user interface if you're still using these. And now is the time that they're actually going away. So that means with Airlock Gateway 8, if you're importing an old configuration and you're still using level legacy, it will be set to standard. And as you know, changing the security level might need some retesting because the behavior is different. Different things will be blocked. I argue that they are much better also regarding false positives, but still you have to go through a testing phase. But you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait until 8.0 is here. You can start today. And there's some tools that we have prepared for helping you to transition to these security levels if you haven't done so far. So there are two bulk operations. One is that you can, for all mappings, or for all deny rule groups, for all mappings actually, that are still on level legacy, you can set the so-called additional logging level to standard. So there are actually two logging levels. One is for two security levels. I mean, one is used for blocking and one is used for logging. So you can still be on legacy, but try how it feels if you're using standard security level. You will then have log-only blocks for the new level. in the logs, and you can even use policy learning to create exceptions for the new levels, even though they're not yet activated. And then when you feel safe, when there's nothing popping up, no new exceptions needed, then you can actually switch to the blocking level standard. So there's another bulk operation where you can say if something is on legacy in blocking level, then you set it on standard. And there you can also check how you want to treat exceptions. What we are recommending here as a default is that you would remove exceptions, old exceptions that you may have on the legacy deny rules, and keep them on the group. So also if you're learning new exceptions using policy learning, I think it's best to add these exceptions on the group level, unless you really know what you do and why a specific rule needs an exception. Okay, the last topic is Microgateway 3.1. As I mentioned in the beginning, it has already been released, I think, in January, but there was no corresponding Airlock Gateway release, so we didn't have a webinar to announce that, and we're doing this here. So one thing that we achieved is a substantial reduction in container size of about 37%. And we're still working on going further down, so that's not the end of it. Then there have been various extensions to the DSL. That's the domain specific language used in the YAML configuration file. We have also updated the Minikube example with a new IAM version. We've added more options to the help chart for deploying. Documentation has been extended quite substantially. We've also added a chapter with tutorials that you can actually, if you have 30 minutes time, you can walk through a tutorial and start playing around with Airlock Microgateway. As you probably know, there's a community edition that doesn't require a license, so you can really start right now. You don't need to call us, you don't need to subscribe, you don't need to send us an email before starting. Okay, so I want to thank you for your attention, and I will have a look at the questions. Or Mike, did you?
Yes, Martin. We do have a question, and it is, do you have a collection of use cases for CMs?
Collection of use cases. Regarding which feature? I mean, you can forward logs of Airlock Gateway to your CM. That's what you can do. We have Ceph certified logs, so it should be relatively easy to import it in the CM of your choice. A collection of use cases. I think I don't understand the question exactly.
Yeah, what we also could say that is we do provide a reporting bundle that will take the logs of the gateway and of Airlock IAM and use Elasticsearch in Kibana to, number one, put the log messages into the Elasticsearch database, and it will also provide you with pre-configured searches and pre-configured dashboards for Kibana. So we're really very good at supporting that. And maybe you want to say something about Splunk support.
Yeah, we do have the Splunk app, actually. If you're using Splunk as a CM, then you can use roughly the same kind of dashboards that you know from the integrated reporting.
Okay, we have a continuation of the question. Our CM provides operate queue radar, but they need to configure use cases on our request. I think you would have to get into contact with our support to really discuss this particular question in more detail on what we can do. I know that we don't support this kind of scenario out of the box.
Mm-hmm. So QRadar is one that certainly supports importing Ceph sources. Yeah, so then it's probably about defining meaningful dashboards and alerts, if I understand that correctly. So one inspiration is certainly the dashboards that you get on Airlock Gateway, but if you're using a CM, I assume that you would like to correlate this information with other sources. Maybe say if you have a block on Airlock Gateway and your network firewall has something to say, and you have I don't know, yeah, you have other sources or virus scans that trigger on a certain IP address, then you want to combine these information and make a strong alert, something like that. But I don't know Curator in detail, and we don't have prepared dashboards for that. Okay, so as I said, the recording will be made available, and we will also publish the slides on TechZone. And if you have follow-up questions, you can, of course, always contact us. I think currently there are no more questions, so we'll just stay online for about 2 more minutes, and I think then we will end the webinar.